All right, so Revelation 6, 5, and 6. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. So Jesus continues opening the edge of the scroll, and another seal separates, leading to a new phase of calamity on the earth. Once more, John is instructed to look down upon the earth to see what transpires. And as he looks, he sees a black horse with a rider holding scales in his hand. And again, the rider is unnamed and referenced only by the pronoun he. As we learned in the earlier two horses, the continuing use of a pronoun means that the character hasn't changed. We're still looking at the same person in each case, the same he, the Antichrist. So we're still looking at the impact of the Antichrist rise upon the world as Jesus propels him up the ladder of power. Now it's important to remember here, as this is so important, is that none of this happens without Jesus allowing it. He's not just doing it on his own. He's being allowed to do this. This time his horse is black. And like the red and white horses, the color could symbolize many things. So we must consider its meaning in context, based on what's said about this horse and the prior horses. Beginning with this man on the black horse is holding scales. Scales are common in our modern culture, and when used as symbols, they usually refer to justice, as in scales of justice. But the context here isn't of justice or fairness. So we need to look to more ancient meaning for this symbol. In ancient times, the monetary system was based on bartering goods whose value was established by weight. So it was necessary to measure an exact amount in each transaction. And a scale would be used to establish and compare the value of an item for sale or a method of payment to a known value. So an object of a known weight would be placed on one side of the scale and another object placed on the opposite side. When the scale is balanced, then the two sides are equal in weight and therefore equal in value. Secondly, when coin money was used, the coins were weighed to verify that they contain the same specific amount of precious metal. Without this check, people would shave small amounts of the metal off their coins to accumulate the metal for themselves. Over time, the coins lose significant weight, thus cheating merchants, and the shaved material could be spent again. So a reference to the Antichrist holding the scales points our attention to the economic impact of this man on the world. And in the context, it clearly symbolizes him impacting retail commerce. And it's easy at this point to see a pattern emerging. The threat of military leader, white horse, becomes a trigger to start a war leading to bloodshed, a red horse. And then following a great war, bringing widespread death and destruction, we have the normal expected consequences. The onset of war always has devastating effects on the economy of the world. And the worse the war, the worse the impact. So the effect of World War III will be severe scarcity of goods, and then naturally, as simply decreases, prices increases. As supply decreases, price increase. We see the price increase reflected clearly in verse 6 as the world endures unprecedented inflation. John is told that a quart of wheat and 3 quarts of barley will each cost a denarius. A denarius was the backbone of the Roman currency system. It was first introduced in 211 BC and contained 4.5 grams of silver. A day laborer in the first century of Rome typically earned 1 denarii per day before taxes. In John's day, a denarii bought around 12 quarts of wheat and 36 quarts of barley. A quart of wheat produces about 1.5 loaves of bread, or enough food to feed a family for a day. So a poor family could sustain themselves on about 2 weeks on 1 denarius worth of wheat, or even longer if they bought barley. By comparison, A laborer working at minimum wage today earns about $80 per day before taxes. A day's wage today, if spent frugally, can support a family with substance food for several days, maybe a week or more. But under the Antichrist, the world experiences runaway inflation for even basic goods. As a result of the Antichrist war, a denaro only buys 1.5 loaves of bread. That would mean a loaf of bread would cost about $60 in today's money. And if bread costs $60, how expensive would items like meat or cheese be? When I was looking at that and going through shopping lately, going, things are getting close to those prices. So we need to ask, what will be the impact of such hyperinflation? The answer is obvious: panic, rampant crime, looting, and ultimately starving for many. Now that's really interesting because we have starving people, we have looting, we have rampant crime, we have people buying things off the shelves that they don't necessarily need today. And we see a little bit out today, just not even close to what they're going to experience here, but at least we can understand a concept of it. The Antichrist will produce these effects indirectly simply through the prosecution of war around the globe. War literally brings pressure on the food supply since it disrupts food production and distribution. And also, armies consume large amounts of supplies, leaving precious little for the civilian people. So the black horse symbolizes the death of many from war-induced hyperinflation and the resulting global starvation. But as before, we trace this event to the opening of a seal, as the Lord permits these judgments to come upon the world. Interestingly, two products are specifically excluded from the high prices. You guys remember what they were? What did it say? The two that were excluded from any problems or any issues? Wine and oil. It's not clear while these are excluded, and many have speculated for why is this. One answer I prefer, that I think is closer to it, is that some of the chief crops in Israel come from olives and grapes, which represent Israel. So the oil and the grapes for wine. So therefore, it may indicate that the land of Israel is spared to some extent from the warfare. That makes sense, since the Antichrist's rise to power comes from an agreement with Israel. So for now, it seems that agreement is protecting Israel from the war ravaging the world. Revelation 6, 7, and 8 says this. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beast of the earth. So the fourth seal brings one more horse with a rider. So we know that we're still looking at a step-by-step impact of the Antichrist's arrival. But this horse changes the pattern slightly because now the rider has a name. Death, and following him is Hades. We're still looking at a horse with a rider and a series, so there is still a connection implied with the first three seals. But naming the rider and the addition of the following adds some new mystery. The addition of Hades has led some to conclude that there are really 5 horses here, but that interpretation misses the larger picture. First, remember the pattern that was established with the first 3 seals. Each horse with a rider represented something that the Antichrist accomplished on earth. The nature of the horse and the other symbols reflected its impact, and each horse builds on the prior horse. The rider of the fourth horse is Death and Hades. So over time, the coins lost significant... obviously, Death and Hades aren't real people. So we're going to stop that.